It's a phenomenon we see all the time, right? Why is it that some highly successful people eventually, and honestly, sometimes spectacularly, just self-destruct? I mean, picture a brilliant entrepreneur who builds an absolute empire only to completely bankrupt it with a few reckless decisions. Or think of an incredible athlete, right, at the peak of their career who just ruins it all with toxic behavior. We almost always look outward to explain these failures. We blame bad luck, we blame tough competition or shifting markets. But what if we're looking in the wrong direction entirely? What if the real saboteur isn't external at all?
Well, in the phenomenal book, Ego is the Enemy, author Ryan Holiday makes a really compelling case. He explains that the absolutely greatest threat to your personal growth and success, it isn't the obstacles the world throws at you. No, it's the saboteur living quietly inside your own head. If you're deeply interested in self-improvement and building a bulletproof mindset, this explainer is going to challenge literally everything you thought you knew about ambition. So today, we're breaking down the main lessons from this modern masterpiece to show you why taming that beast within is the absolute, non-negotiable prerequisite for long-lasting achievement.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Just to be totally clear, in this Ego is the Enemy summary, we are not talking about ego in that complex Freudian psychology kind of way. We're talking about it in the completely practical, everyday sense. Holiday defines ego as an unhealthy belief in your own importance. It's arrogance, it's self-centered ambition. You know that insidious little voice whispering that you're just naturally better than everyone else? That you somehow deserve the reward without actually putting in the blood, sweat, and tears? That the rules just don't apply to you? Yeah, that. That is the exact kind of arrogance that absolutely wrecks true mastery and cuts your success short no matter what craft you're pursuing.
All right, moving into Section 1, the life loop. Aspire, success, and failure.
To really understand how this works, we've got to look at the basic structure of our lives. We don't just achieve a goal and suddenly freeze in time, right? We're constantly in motion. And the book masterfully categorizes our journey into this continuous, endless cycle. Think about your own life lessons for a second. At any given moment, you are in one of three stages. First, you aspire. Then, aspiration leads to success, assuming you actually put in the work, of course. But success inevitably creates its own brand new challenges and adversity. And that adversity, it eventually drops you right back to aspiration, forming this endless loop. Now here is the danger. Your ego is just waiting in the wings to derail you at every single step. When you aspire, ego makes you delusional. When you succeed, it makes you complacent and arrogant. And when you fail, ego turns what should be a learning opportunity into this devastating blow to your core identity. So managing your ego isn't just a one-and-done deal. It's practically a full-time job required at every step of this loop.
Which brings us to Section 2, Purpose over Passion, the first antidote.
So how do we actually fight back? How do we protect our personal growth from this internal enemy? Well, we move to one of the most powerful key ideas in the whole book, choosing purpose over passion. Look, we are constantly bombarded by modern culture telling us to just find our passion, right? To let blind emotion drive the bus. But here's the hard truth. Amateurish passion is incredibly easy for the ego to hijack. Passion is all about blind emotion. It's all talk, driven by the delusions of ego. This crazy idea that you somehow deserve something just because you care about it a whole lot. And this brilliantly illustrates the contrast with purpose. Purpose is about clarity. It's about discipline and quiet, relentless execution. Consider Bill Walsh. He's the legendary coach who took the San Francisco 49ers from being literally the absolute worst team in the NFL all the way to the Super Bowl. He didn't focus on some vague, passionate, ego-driven fantasy of winning. Nope. He focused entirely on the ground-level basics. He obsessed over perfecting the fundamentals, knowing for a fact that the score would take care of itself. The ancient Greeks actually had a word for this disciplined focus, euthymia. It's the ability to just stay on your own path without getting distracted by all the noise.
And when you operate with that kind of purpose, you gain this incredible emotional restraint. Just look at the story of Jackie Robinson. Being the very first African-American to play Major League Baseball, he faced unimaginable, truly horrific racism from fans, from coaches, and even his own peers. Now, if Robinson had reacted with his ego, if he had lashed out in what would have been completely justifiable anger, he wouldn't have created the monumental historical impact that he did. But he refused. He refused those ego-driven reactions and absorbed the abuse because he was deeply anchored to a much higher purpose. That level of restraint in the face of intense adversity, it's absolutely essential for true success.
Now, this brings us to another really critical concept. When you inevitably hit the failure phase of that loop we talked about. It's the choice between alive time and dead time. Think about Malcolm X.
When he went to prison, he was completely stripped of his freedom. That could have so easily been dead time. Time spent just passively waiting around, feeling sorry for himself, letting his terrible circumstances dictate his entire mindset. But instead, he made it a lifetime. He read voraciously. He actively learned. He improved, and he totally transformed himself, eventually leaving prison a vastly more educated and powerful man. When you face a setback, your ego desperately wants you to sit in dead time and complain. But purpose demands you use it as a lifetime.
All right, moving on to section 3. Always be a student. The second antidote. So as we move into the success phase of our life loop, we hit an antidote that sounds incredibly simple, but is actually staggeringly difficult to maintain. The greatest leaders and thinkers out there, they all share one common trait. They are lifelong students. They never, ever allow success to convince them that they've got it all figured out. A perfect example from the source material is Kirk Hammett. Shortly after he was recruited to be the lead guitarist for the heavy metal band Metallica, meaning he had by all accounts completely made it, what did he do? He hired a guitar teacher. I mean, think about that. He knew that to become truly great and to stay great, he had to actively welcome critical feedback. He remained totally humble. As the book so powerfully states, if you're not still learning, you're already dying. Your ego wants to rush to the finish line, convinced that patience and studying are just for losers, but a true professional, they act like a sponge.
Which takes us to section 4. Talk less, do more. The third antidote.
Now, what's really interesting about this concept is how it plays out today. In a world utterly obsessed with social media, our ego is constantly urging us to broadcast our intentions, right? We want the applause before we've actually done any of the heavy lifting. This creates what's known as the imaginary audience. It's this psychological delusion we all kind of carry around, this nagging belief that everyone is constantly watching, judging, and thinking about us. And because of this, we spend a massive amount of energy just talking, performing, and agonizing over our image. But the truth? It's incredibly freeing, actually. People don't think about you nearly as much as you think they do. They're totally consumed by their own lives. Your ego absolutely thrives on this imaginary audience, and it dreams the exact energy you desperately need to be using for execution and producing real results. You've got to let go of that abstract haze and just get to work.
And that brings us to section 5, mastering your ego. Practical takeaways.
So we've covered the life loop, and we've gone over the antidotes: purpose, the student mindset, and silence. But how do we actually take these profound life lessons and apply them to our own daily work, our creativity, and our relationships? Well, here is your immediate toolkit for personal growth, distilled straight from this incredible book summary. Number 1, focus on the basics. Stop obsessing over the final outcome and just perfect your daily inputs, exactly like Bill Walsh did. 2, ignore that imaginary audience. Just stop performing for people who aren't even watching. 3, be an absolute sponge for critical feedback. Force yourself to find a teacher, especially when you think you're already an expert. 4, when you inevitably face those tough setbacks, violently choose a lifetime over dead time. And finally, number 5, do the grunt work quietly. Talking destroys action. Silence is the environment where true mastery actually grows.
So, the crucial point here is captured just perfectly in this quote from the book. Most successful people are people you've never heard of. They want it that way. True greatness, it comes from humble beginnings. It comes from doing that unglamorous, difficult grunt work when the weather kept everyone else indoors. It requires you to ignore the plaudits other people are getting, and honestly, more importantly, ignoring the plaudits you're getting. True mastery thrives in quiet diligence, not in constantly seeking the limelight. And to really keep yourself grounded in this reality, Ryan Holiday leans on this beautiful concept from Stoic philosophy called sympatheia. It's basically a deep recognition of our connectedness with the cosmos. It's the incredibly simple act of stepping outside, looking up at the vastness of the night sky, and fully realizing just how incredibly small you and your ego truly are. When you connect with the infinite like that, you realize how utterly pointless it is to rage, to fight, and to constantly try to one-up everyone around you. It just naturally shrinks the ego right down and reveals your true purpose.
At the end of the day, the ego wants recognition. It wants to feel incredibly important without actually putting in the grueling effort. But true confidence doesn't need to talk, it just produces work. So I want to leave you with a deeply important question to carry with you today. When you're facing a brand new task, do you instinctively seek to talk about it just to get a quick hit of validation? Or do you actually have the courage to face the struggle head-on in complete silence? Abandon your ego today, embrace humility, become a lifelong student, and let's get back to the critical work.